And your Bible with you tonight, if you'll turn to the book of Mark. Book of Mark, chapter 2. Brother Bill, she beat you. Mark chapter 2. We'll start reading in verse 23. The Bible says, and it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and the disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. The Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said to them, Have ye never read what David did when he had need and was an hungered, he and they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, but the priest, and gave also to them which were with him. And he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. He entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath days, and they might accuse him. And he said to the man which had that withered hand, Stand forth. And he said to them, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. When he had looked around about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. The Pharisees went forth, and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Fall with this day, and for me, bless us, Lord. Have your way tonight. Open our hearts and our minds to your word. Touch me, Lord, for your purpose, for your glory. Jesus' precious holy name we pray. Amen. Thoughts on my mind, let me deal with, and then we'll move on. I think it has something to do with the message. We can, as individuals, be a bit sometimes too strict, even sometimes on ourselves. I have sideburns. You see these things? They come all the way down to here. I like them down there. I grew up, well, it took me a while, but I started growing up way back in the 70s. Do you know what they had in the 70s? You ever see those things? It's pretty good size sideburns. They were bushy and everything. The reason I mentioned that is because it was my dad's thought pattern. And we read it in Leviticus Wednesday night, did we not, about cropping the size of your... Dad said this, and not having sideburns was not... Men had sideburns, okay? I'm sure it's somewhat part of what plays into it. In the 70s, they had these big bushy sideburns. When I started going to the barber shop, the barber would always come up here about midway where I've got my sideburns and cut them off, and I let them go back down. And I go to the barber shop, he'd cut them off, and I every once in a while I would mention to him, leave the sideburns alone, and he'd trim them up and go on. But the next time he'd cut them off. I say all that just to say that that's me. I like my sideburns. It suits what I think I should look like. Okay? I don't necessarily like wearing black. You said, Brother John, you're important today. I guess it was God's way of kind of opening my eyes to something. The visitor we had this morning had on a black shirt and gray suit. I matched him.
But I don't. But it was the shirt that I'm a person of habit too. I've got things in order, and this is the suit that was next, and the shirt that matched it that was next was black one. But I say all that because sometimes we can be a bit strict on ourselves over things that don't really matter. Having said all that, let me draw your attention back to verse 27. Chapter 2, verse 27. He said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. You hear that. You let that soak in, because sometimes we don't understand that the idea of Sabbath, and understand the word Sabbath refers to a rest, intermission, a break from the routine, if you will. That the Sabbath was made for man. That when God created heaven and the earth in 6 days, He could have done it in one, by the way, if He wanted to. He did it in 6 days, not because He had to take 6 days to do it, but because it was necessary. It was a set of pattern for us. And on the seventh, He rested, because we need rest. It is good that we take some time to rest. That is part of what He's saying. And that the Sabbath, in that sense, both in the example of creation and given in the law, was given for us, for our benefit, and not us for it. That kind of sheds some light on what's happening in the New Testament time frame. They elevated a day in its importance. They weren't elevating going to church, going to the synagogue, okay? They were elevating the day itself. That the Sabbath day. And you say, well, Brother John, in the law it says, to keep out of the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And by the way, let me say this. And we live in a culture where it's kind of impossible anymore. We have early church was there too, in the Roman culture. But if I can have my way about it, I won't work on Sunday. Well, years ago, I worked for the sheriff's department. We had to work on Sunday once in a while. Then I was at Dura. There were some Sundays I needed to work in between services. I felt like there were many ways that I honored the Sabbath day, or at least the Sunday that I would consider my worship day. And by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but I worked pretty much every Sunday ever since I started preaching. But I think in some sense that I am honoring or trying to honor the day that not so much that is set aside for rest for me, but the day that I have set aside to worship. Having said all that, the day was made for man, not man for the day. Having said that also, let me say that part of the idea of the Sabbath day was that the day for them to worship, but they were not to worship the day. And that's part of the issue. That's part of the issue. Let me show you some things in here that Christ brings out that in the process of time. I think a lot of this takes place in one day. In verses 23 through 26, on the front side of this, let me show you this. So it came to pass that He went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day. They're just going through the cornfields on the Sabbath day. They just happen to be, they're just taking that path. All right? And as they're walking, it says, and His disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. That as they went through, they would grab them. In other words, they're not really stopping and going through and picking corn. They're not harvesting corn. They're getting them a little bit of something to eat. I might make mention, it may not really matter, because it really doesn't matter to the story, but the corn here is not referring to the corn that we call corn. Okay? The corn we call corn wasn't even known about until the white man came to America. It's not, so it's just a grain of some kind, not really sure which grain it is, but it's a grain. And they're just going through, and possibly, depending on the type of grain that it is, they could have just reaching out and grabbing the top of the head and just pull it off in their hand as they walk. And then throw it in their mouth, maybe, I don't know, maybe they may have to go out there and get some of that husk out of there or whatever and just throw it in their mouth. That's what they're doing. They're not working, except in the eyes of the Pharisees. They're eating. Nonetheless, and the Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And I want you to understand, the idea here is not that it's not lawful according to this law, but it's not lawful according to how they have interpreted the law. Why are your disciples doing that which is not lawful on the Sabbath day? And Christ points them to something that took place in the Old Testament. I think in 1 Samuel. It's in 1 Samuel 21. And if I recall right, and I didn't go back and read the story, but if I recall right, Absalom has taken the throne of David, and David is fleeing from his son. And he comes to a synagogue and goes in, and there, by the way, in that synagogue, not only does he eat the showbread and give some to his men as well, that they might be fed in their flight from Absalom, but that's also the place where they kept the sword of Goliath, and he takes it with him. What's important here in the story and what Christ points to is the very fact that though David had a need, it was not lawful by the law, not by their interpretation, but by the law, for David to eat of it. David had a personal need. David and his men had they were in flight from the wrath of his son Absalom, and they had a need to eat. And there was no food available except that which was in the synagogue. There was showbread, and he and his men ate of it. You ever heard that word grace? You ever heard that word mercy? See, that is what's being seen. God supplied the needs of David and his men through grace and mercy. And what Christ is pointing to is though you may have an idea of what the Sabbath is, going through and picking a little bit of grain off the top of a husk and throwing it in your mouth and chewing on it and eating for your personal sustenance, for your need, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And the Pharisees are saying, you can't do this. He said, listen, this is what David and his men did in the days of Abiathar the high priest. Have you not read that? And then they go from outside to inside, and in verse 1, chapter 3, it goes on and says that he entered into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath days, that they might accuse him. Now listen, they're in the synagogue. There's a man there whose hand, and I don't know how it might be. Sometimes they're like this right here, and that may be the way his hand may be. It may be in this fashion. Very evident that he's not able to do. And they see him, and they see Christ, and they sit there and just wait. Because understand, doing a miraculous healing is obviously work. And you can't do that on the seventh day. And so they sit back and wait that they might accuse. I want you to know part of the purpose. Not that they might correct, not that they might keep from someone breaking the law, but that they might accuse. You ever met anybody like that? All they want to do is point a finger. They're just sitting there waiting to point a finger. The Bible says in verse 3, and he saith unto the man which had a withered hand, stand forth. And he said unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or to do evil? To save life or to kill it? But they held their peace. You understand what question he's saying? For me to do nothing is evil. You ever been there? For me to do nothing is evil. I have the ability to heal this hand. And for me not to heal it is an evil act. Is it lawful to do that which is good or to do evil? You ever think about the fact that doing nothing sometimes is doing something? I have the power to save a man's life. Would you rather me on the Sabbath day kill him or save his life? So then, but they held their peace. Don't you note verse 5? You think about Christ moving somewhat in anger when he drives the money changer out of the temple. But notice what he says here. And when he had looked around about on them with anger, being grieved with the hardness of their hearts, he said unto the man, stretch forth thy hand, and he stretched it out, and his hand was restored, whole as the other. You understand what he's done. He knows who he's talking to, by the way. But it doesn't change the fact that he's hoping for a glimmer of light within their hearts to break forth and then say, you're right. You need to heal him. And instead, they're sitting there wanting to accuse him, and their hearts are hard with bitterness. And Christ stands there and becomes angry, grieving in himself because of their hardness. Because the day became more important than a people, than a person. I find then that though I believe I should honor the day that I have set aside to rest and to worship, but I should also, if I have personal needs, I need to meet them. And if I see the needs of others, I need to meet them, if I can. That's what I see. But something else I noticed. Verse 28, chapter 2. I skipped it on purpose. I mentioned to you before that the term Son of Man comes out of the book of Daniel, and that they would know that term. And when he used that term, he's saying, I'm God. Okay? But I want you to note what he says to them. Therefore, the Son of Man, I'm God, is Lord also of the Sabbath. He says to these Pharisees, listen, I'm God, and I'm over the Sabbath. Not only in the word Lord there is the word kurios, which just means supreme, and oftentimes we refer to someone as being a Lord in position as such. And so therefore, he is over the Sabbath, if you will. But not only is he over it in authority, he's over it in importance as well. He's more important than the Sabbath itself. And that I think is the essence of what he's saying, because listen, my whole purpose in being at church on Sunday is to worship Christ. And how can I worship Christ if I ignore the needs of others? How can I worship Christ if I don't seek to energize my own body to be able to do the things that I need to do for others. Christ is the one I'm worshiping, not today. God is the one I'm worshiping, not today. Both the importance and the authority are there. Son of Man, the Messiah. Then I noted also in chapter 3 and verse 6 the impact that it had on the Pharisees. As it says, the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how that they might destroy him. Sometimes I feel that way about the message I preach. I feel like sometimes we hit people wrong. Instead of moving them to compassion and do good, they throw up their fist at me to fight. So that's the way it feels sometimes, okay? Tonight everyone's asleep. Okay, Brother John, you're done. And I've already added 10 minutes to the message because of the way you're. Listen, the Pharisees, their first purpose in that, when he entered the synagogue, was to find a reason to accuse him. And when he showed them they were wrong, then they found others that would join with them to find a way to destroy him. Because they wanted to worship the day and not the man who created the day. Makes me wonder sometimes, what do we portray to people? What are we telling people by our actions, by our words? Do we point out the importance of Jesus? Or are we celebrating things down here that he's over? Trying to elevate their importance instead of him. Let's do a song.